Welcome, welcome. So my voice is going to be a little bit lower tonight, and I'm not hugging anyone, which I normally do. A little bit under the weather, so work with me tonight. I appreciate it. Who's been to a Startup Grind event before? Raise your hand. First timers? First timers in Denver? I got an Ecuador guy here today. It's not his first Startup Grind, but he's been to Startup Grind in Ecuador. Okay, a couple things first before we get into everything. I was in California last week, and then kind of a cool thing, our speaker was as well for our annual global conference in Silicon Valley. And we do 2.5 days of a global conference, about 8,000 people attend, startups from literally all over the world. And for those of you that don't know, we have about 600 chapters, Startup Grind everywhere from the Middle East to Africa to Asia and everywhere in between. I'm sorry if I left anywhere out. Again, it's the cold medicine. And we have about of the 600, I found out about 525 of them are very active. And the last 2.5 days after the conference, we have a 2.5-day directors retreat, and all the directors come together. We had about 250 directors show up. And they did sort of a slideshow for us, and I was very proud of this, and I want to attribute it to our volunteers after I pull it up on the screen. If you can put that up there. By the way, this fine gentleman here is one of our Cape Town guys. But if you look here, and I'll get a better one of these next time. But yes, this is from all over the world, as you can see, these different cities. This is the amount of attendees and amount of events. We are number 9 on each, which I think is pretty freaking awesome. Yes. So if I can get my volunteers to all stand up. Volunteers, please, if you're in the room, stand up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These guys are amazing. Give it up to my co-director, Sabina, who's done so much. And also, Workability has been just an amazing partner for us. They give us the space for free. They don't ask anything of us, just to come and bring good events. So let's just give it up for them as well. So, we're just, I think it says a lot about the people behind, that are here, the volunteers, the attendees, the people like you that keep coming. But also about where we are as a city. I'm one of those rare people that have been in Denver almost my entire life, a few years in high school in California, but outside of that, I've been here. And to see Denver be on the map the way it is today is pretty exciting. I've spent my whole life in business traveling, and then when I would tell people in the past that I was from Denver, generally if it was a man, they would mention the Broncos, and depending on how they were doing, it would depend if I wanted to respond. Or if it was a woman or a man, they would bring up skiing, and that was it. And now today, when you bring up Denver, when I'm walking around and meeting people from India and meeting people from Dayton, Ohio, or wherever, they would talk to me about Denver being a top tech city, a top startup city. So this is an exciting time. So yes, we'll switch back to the regular slide. That is Bruce over there. If you ever see him, he's a fantastic guy. Just a couple other quick announcements. Want to give it up for Ian's Pizza, providing pizza for us. Riacho Beer Works, Vodka. Anyone drinking vodka tonight? Scotch. They also provide scotch. Ira Coleman with Fluent Hustle, who's doing our filming tonight. Give it up to Ira. And then real quickly, our next event is actually in 2 weeks. Is our winter gala that FormStack is our big sponsor behind that. We do have some room for some additional sponsors if you're interested. This is an event I wouldn't miss. Good times or parties are always a lot of fun for any of the folks here that have been to a party before of ours. You can certainly talk about it to others. Okay, with that said, thank you. I want to call up our speaker without any further ado. Please welcome Raz to the table here. All right, fantastic. Well, Raz, thank you so much for coming.
Great, thank you for having me.
Really excited to learn about your venture and everything, but I did want to touch on it. I didn't find this out until, I feel like just a few weeks or so ago, that you, in fact, were also at the conference in Redwood City.
I was.
And you were a speaker there too.
I was.
How was that for you?
It's great. It's a fun experience. One of the things that's great about Silicon Valley, for those that have been there or have just observed from the outside in, is the amount of energy and kind of just conviction around creating. It's all creators
right.
in many ways. So anything's possible. There are no obstacles. Doesn't mean we don't all have really shitty days in
Sure.
the valley as well.
Yeah,
but there's a different level of energy. So it was a really impressive event. It was a pleasure to be a part of it.
And were you able to kind of partake in the conference, or was it mainly
I was
just...
not. I was scheduled. I came in hot and I left
Yeah,
hot.
yeah.
So I was in meetings kind of all the way up to the event,
yeah.
and then I was in meetings right after that. So I got a dose on the way in.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you were able to speak, and
was
it's
great.
awesome to now have you here in Denver. I mean, we like Silicon Valley here too, but I think you saw us up there on the charts.
I'm a Coloradan now.
Yeah, yes.
I'm all in. I'm not from the valley
Definitely,
anymore,
definitely.
no.
Well, Raz, before we get into what you're doing today in the company and the water, and you already kind of sold me by giving me a good hoodie. Somebody must have prepped you on that. I'm a hoodie guy.
I heard.
You heard, okay.
heard,
the
yeah.
word got out. But we'd love to kind of hear your story, as an entrepreneur, as a founder. Where did this all begin? When did you realize you were different than everyone else and you had to do your own thing, or you wanted to be a founder, or what have you?
It's funny. I don't actually, not to start as a contrarian, but I tend not to think of myself as much different than anybody else. I've kind of always thought of myself as an ordinary dude trying to do something extraordinary.
Right.
And I do know there's certain proclivities that I have that might fall outside the standard deviation a little bit.
Sure.
But I think probably when I realized that I was way too entrepreneurial for a big company was I was sitting at a desk at Eli Lilly. I was one of the youngest associates. There was kind of this career pathway of associate to director to vice president. And most of my peers were all corporate hires that came from prestigious MBA programs or were lifers that had been there and gotten in early. And I was 23 in corporate, younger than by 7 to 10 years of my peers.
Sure.
So I was on this cool track, and everyone's like, hey, this is fantastic, you're moving. And I remember feeling how slow it was. You'd have to stay in a job for 2 years before you could do the next thing, and 2 years was quick. And I remember hearing a guy, I can remember his name, it's been 23 years, and I can remember his name, and I haven't heard it since. I won't say his name, because I think I'm friends with him on Facebook. But he said, I walked by his desk and I heard him say something like 10 years, 4 months, and 20 days. And then I figured out he was talking about how long it was until he was retired. And the only time I'd ever heard anybody talk like that was in the movies when they were talking about what? Their jail sentence or their prison sentence, their remaining prison sentence. And I was like, man, that sounds kind of like, that was eye-opening for me. That was a point in time. That wasn't what caused me to be entrepreneurial.
Right.
I'd always had that DNA, but not a lot of people were doing startups at that time. And startups were more entrepreneurial businesses that were non-tech oriented for the most part, particularly in Columbus, Ohio. So I had an opportunity to go join a startup in New York City. This is in March of 2000. And I was sixth employee hired, kind of rolled the dice. Left Lilly. I was the first person that...
Let me slow you down for a minute. So let's go back to that moment for a minute. You hear that from him. What did it just kind of change your world a little bit, just in the sense of this isn't how I want to think. This isn't.
It was kind of a revelation of seeing somebody. It was like if you could see yourself in the future.
Right.
That could have been me.
Right.
Or he perhaps was me.
Right.
20 years earlier.
Yeah.
And it stuck with me for many months. And it wasn't like where I heard this guy say that and I said, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here.
Yeah,
it wasn't
but it gets
quite
you
that.
thinking.
But it was like, these seeds get planted in all of us.
Right.
And sometimes you wonder if what you're saying is ever resonating with anybody. We all wonder that at times. And sometimes that seed doesn't manifest for years, and sometimes decades. And so in that case, it took a period of months. There was a variety of things that were conflating factors. I mean, I did not have the typical DNA of wanting to do a corporate gig. I mean, when I was 18, I was selling knives. When I was 19, I was selling other people on how to sell knives, and I had 200 sales reps working for me out of a satellite office in Sandusky, Ohio, and was training people on how to, sell door to door and all that stuff. So I had a little bit of that proclivity early on already.
So Raz, I mean, that's where my sort of initial question came from. I kind of joke about it, what makes you different or what makes you crazy or what's wrong with you for being an
I can
entrepreneur.
answer what makes me crazy for sure.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
But, it is, for better or for worse or what have you, that there is something in someone that generally there's a story behind, like yourself, that was selling candy out of their locker
Yeah.
or whatever it is, selling knives, or then, kind of managing people on selling knives or what have you. It starts somewhere there, and it's wanting to sort of do your own thing, or wanting to lead, or wanting to invent or create.
I think, well, the word that actually you just hit it again, which is, that word that I used about kind of a way to describe people in the valley, which
Right.
is a generalism, but it is generally true, is that
Right.
there are a bunch of creators
Yes.
that are out there, right?
Yeah.
And so I do think people that have entrepreneurial tendencies or are entrepreneurs, there's a level of unsettledness, competitiveness, of frustration with kind of status quo
Right.
that is underlying that. But I also think by nature they like creating stuff.
Right.
They like building things. They like watching things happen and
Yes.
making things happen. So, it's interesting because I also consider myself really fortunate to have been in a pathway. I mean, there's not a lot of people, there's a lot different now. Not to make myself sound so old, I'm 46, but I'm not 26 either.
Right.
And when I was 26, there are not 24 or 22, there are not a lot of people that are incubating companies in Columbus,
Right.
Ohio. So I do consider myself fortunate in that there are a lot of people I think have entrepreneurial DNA. And sometimes, and this is one of the things I love about Startup Grind,
Right.
is that helps unlock.
Yes.
It just unlocks and releases this pathway of potential. And the reality is for all of us that are sitting here in this room, the fact is that we were born in the United States, most of us, and if we were born in an entirely different market, an entirely different continent, you could have all these skill sets, and
Right.
environment matters, right? So I do consider myself to have certain behaviors that are very entrepreneurial for sure,
Right.
but at the same time I also consider myself really lucky to have been in a variety of positions where I did work hard. I did have a lot of failures along the way.
Right.
But I got some breaks along the way, and I got blessed as a result of it by working with really good people, working for really good people. I have about a dozen people out of the 30 people that work here at the FloWater HQ that are here tonight, and super fortunate to have all the team that's here. But I like this team that's actually here especially more than the other ones that didn't show up.
And you can have them watch the video, so if there's anything else you want to say to them.
I'm totally joking, by the way. I'm totally joking. We already did merit reviews and everything this week. It's all done.
Well, you can always get ahead of the game, right? I mean, so okay, no, that helps. I mean, just kind of that DNA that you're talking about. And
I didn't grow up in an entrepreneurial household, though. I mean, the very quick story
Sure.
on it is, and this is actually goes back to just having good fortune and to some degree luck. And there's a thing that we all face, which are generational decisions. And so my grandparents on my dad's side were immigrants from Lithuania. My
wow.
grandmother was a house cleaner until she was like 89. Chicago, Illinois. She spoke decent English, but she immigrated over when she was 23, 24, in the early 20s. And then my grandfather escaped Lithuania when it was under communist rule by Russia and came in through Ellis Island, and right around the same age went to Chicago. It's where he met my grandmother. Never went past first or second grade. I don't think he could read very well.
Really?
I don't know that he could read, and he could not write very well. And ironically, my dad ended up getting a degree in rocket science, like literally, thermal fluid dynamics, undergrad, master's, 2 master's degrees, a PhD in thermal fluid dynamics, worked at NASA, was a part of the Apollo 1 through Apollo 13 launch. And the only difference
fantastic.
was he came from the lineage of my grandparents.
Yeah.
My grandfather pressed suits at Harsh Schaffner Marx till he was 91. My grandmother cleaned houses till she was 89.
Right.
And it was environment and circumstance to some
Sure.
degree, right? So my dad actually, I think as a result of that upbringing, had not nearly entrepreneurial tendencies. I mean, I was one of 5 kids, the oldest
Sure.
of 5. We grew up in Columbus, Ohio. For a while, I was a teacher at Ohio State University, and didn't make a lot of money doing that, and so there was not a lot of entrepreneurialism in the household.
Right.
But I did have some tendencies, perhaps heavy tendencies towards that.
But it's interesting because your father, I'd have to imagine there was some sort of influence still from his parents, even though they grew up the way they did, for him to get something better.
For sure.
And
I mean, street hustle, for sure.
right.
I mean, there was like no lollygagging, as my dad would say.
Right.
Has anyone ever heard that word before? Okay, all right.
Yes.
My dad also used to say grok the fullness a lot, which I should have Googled before I came here exactly what that means. It's Greek, and it's like pull the essence out of it, whatever it is.
I like that.
And so, yeah, there was no lollygagging at the house. I mean, in fact, we used to have, so kind of related to that question or that comment that you made, we used to have article review night. So before there was email and before there were inboxes, we had physical inboxes, right? So you actually circulate articles from like Time Magazine or what have you. So 1 of 5, we all had an inbox. So, the ages of the kids were 12, 10, 8, 6, 4. And we all had inboxes. So my dad would circulate Popular Science, Scientific American, Time, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. And we'd have article review night every Friday night at the dining room table from like 7 to 9 p.m. where we were supposed to grok the fullness out of the articles that we read and shared the nuggets of learnings and
Kind
wisdom.
of a book report in a sense?
It was.
Yeah.
So there was a fair amount of, I think that stemmed from someone that recognized how grateful he was to be in the position that we were compared to what he grew up with and his parents grew up with.
Right. No, that's a great story.
It didn't feel great at the time, David.
Writing the reports didn't feel good?
No. I mean, I still can, you know what's funny though?
That sucks because I was thinking about instituting that in my house with
You
my
should
kids.
do it. I mean, look, making your kids unhappy is one of the greatest joys as a parent. So, I mean, you should do it because I kid you not, there are still moments where I'll be talking to somebody and I will pull out something that I remember from an article 30 years ago.
Wow.
And partly because not because I have a good memory, because it was so formative and it was so memorable from doing that as a kid. So at the time it wasn't, the best, but I look back on it and those were like one of my favorite memories from growing up.
Yeah, no, that's terrific.
Which is nerdy, I know,
Well,
of me.
We'll get there.
But, okay.
So going back, so you leave your company in Columbus, Ohio.
I went to school in Indiana.
Okay.
Wanted to get out of Indiana.
Okay.
No offense to Indiana or Ohio, but I wanted to move to. I wanted to get to New York or San Francisco.
Sure.
Like that
You wanted
was
to be at a
those
coast
were my,
city.
Yeah, I wanted to see if I could make it.
Right.
And so I ended up going out to New York, and then I was graduating, and I had 3 different kind of classic opportunities that were J&J, HP, and IBM, all in sales. And so that's where I started my career out at J&J on the East Coast in the greater New York City era, and then did Lilly for a couple of years.
Yep.
And then is when I started my kind of startup stint in New York City.
And what was the first thing? What was the first startup?
First startup was a company called Healthology, and so it was it was basically a content creation company. So this is back in the 90s, like 99, 2000, there were all these websites like Dr. Coop, who people aren't familiar with, but Medscape was out there, WebMD was out there. You're certainly familiar with that if you've ever had a headache / possibly brain cancer. So some people got that.
I've been on that site all week.
Yeah, right.
What is wrong with me?
I know. I don't even do it anymore. I just don't do it to myself because I got a little bit, I got 2% hypochondria in my Myers-Briggs personality profile. So it was a content creation company, and so all these companies like ABC News were creating websites, and they needed to have health content, and they didn't have health content. They didn't have medical directors on site. It was a lot. It's hard to write content. So what we do is we go to all these publishers and all these media properties, and we say, look, let us power your health content. And so what we were doing was basically creating a ton of content, syndicate. It was like PR Newswire for the web, for websites. And it was a really great experience for me because it was so formidable. I mean, I joined right as the market was crashing in March of 2000. That was like literally CPMs were going from, which we don't even talk about CPMs anymore, but CPMs went from like $100 down to like $3. Companies were going out of business left and right. And it was a really gnarly period of time. I remember at one point We had about 100 employees. I was running sales, marketing, and client services for that company. At one point, we had about 100, 120 employees, went up and down, grew up, cut down. But I literally remember there were certain days where I would come in on a Friday afternoon and I would have gone and gotten checks from clients for $30, $50, $100,000 that my CFO was running into payroll. You couldn't do that now. But back at the time, that's kind of what you did, right? And went through 9/11 as well during that time, which was another gritty piece of you just learn a lot when you're in the fire, and in the fire it doesn't always feel super comfortable.
What was your capacity at that company? What role were you in?
I was the EVP of sales, marketing, and client services. So I reported to the CEO, and there were about 4 other executives. In fact, I mean, to me, this is like one of my breaks, right? Which is I remember going and meeting with the CEO, interviewed. I was at Lilly. I was 24 at the time. And he's one of my good friends today. He's probably to this day the best guy that I've ever worked for. His name was Steven Heimowitz. And Steven said to me, you also probably couldn't say this today, but he looked at me, he's like, man, he's like, you're perfect for the head of sales and marketing role. But he's like, I can't hire you. He's like, you're just too young. He's like, you're 24. He's like, I just hired, raised $10 million. I don't know what my investors are going to think. They want someone with some season to them at the table. So I basically said, hey, I'll tell you what, make a deal with me. Hire me for whatever role you're comfortable in a year. If it doesn't work out, or 90 days, fire me or promote me. But that's the path that I want to get on, which is let me put points on the board, or move me out of the organization and I'll throw down. So he's like, all right. He's like, wasn't quite like that, but he's like, all right, I'll take a bet on you.
Sure.
And, long story short, I ended up moving into the role. And this is where I think one of the great things about working at early stage companies is that in a big company, you get these great classical training, and there's a lot of virtues to it. And I'm not an anti-big company person whatsoever. It's not as much for me. I struggle a little bit in that environment. I can operate a little bit more in it today than I could at 22 or 24. But that being said, maybe not. Actually, my team might disagree with that. But I think the greatest thing about being in an entrepreneurial environment is that meritocracy often wins. It doesn't always win. There's luck to what we're doing, and timing, and team, and all these things. But I got to be the beneficiary of being in an environment where merit won and points on the board won.
Right, versus having X amount of time there and things of that nature. Age.
Right, whatever it was.
Yeah.
Or is. Yeah.
So going from that situation, talk to the crowd about the first time you were involved in launching your own thing, whether it be as a co-founder, coming in once the company was already up, or just doing your own thing entirely.
Yeah, so I went from New York City, where I was effectively the number 2 guy to the CEO, and we got the company to profitability. It was later sold to iVillage and later bought by NBC. But during all of that, I went and took a job as president of a nutritional products company near Cincinnati, Ohio. It was in Kentucky. Have you ever been to Cincinnati?
I have.
So you know the bridge between Cincinnati and Kentucky?
I was in Cincinnati and got out as fast as I could.
It's a very long bridge. It's not that long, but it's very, very long in terms of what happens on both sides of it. And so this was actually in Kentucky. And that was I probably underestimated the culture shock of me going from startup New York City, and they probably also underestimated the Rich Razgaitis factor of culture shock of pulling him out of New York City and bringing him to Kentucky to restart a company. That was my first job running a business and being responsible for it. It was privately held, 50-year-old, second generation family-owned business. Never really had an outside executive come in and run it. But that was an established restart in many ways. So I did that for 3 years. Restarted, turned it into a retail food, drug, mass company that was a nutritional product sold, into drugstores and food stores and whatnot. The first real startup though was back in New York, and that's where I joined a company called Delon. So this is in the 2009, 2010 era when Groupon, Living Social were all just getting going. I knew a guy from my prior time at Healthology on a prior stint, on prior move. I mean, I'd moved to 3 different places since I went back to New York City the second time around. And took the job as a CEO and a co-founder of a company called Delon. basically there were two of us that kind of had incubated this idea. We raised a little bit of capital, around $1 million. We sold it about 10 months later for around $10 million. It was a very quick turn. We didn't expect that it would work out that way. The investors did really, really well. But that was kind of my first early stage into the ecosystem experience of running a tech company, having not done that before and having not kind of grown up in that environment. Of course, it's very different. Like when you're in startup grind ecosystem or you're in Silicon Valley, like you kind of just learn by osmosis in many ways.
So did that, I mean, that's a crazy quick turnaround in terms
That
of.
was particularly quick. Yeah, that was
Did
abnormally
that
quick.
excite you in a way that like, okay, I got to do this again, or hey, that went too fast, I got to start again? I mean, where did that leave you?
Yeah, I've never done drugs, but I think it's probably what drugs would be like if I did do drugs, but I do not do drugs. And so I really don't. I'm very, I won't get into it since we're in Colorado, but that's like, for me, very much like a drug in many ways, which is, you get this shot, you get this injection of adrenaline at the, and it's not, I don't think now for me, it's the exit. I mean, like I don't look at our company right now saying, man, I just want to get to the, all it is a marker along the way of validation of people saying, yes, you have created something that has asset value that gets substantiated by the marketplace, right? And so customers do that, team does that, revenues do that, investors do that. That's a substantiation point. Liquidity does that.
Right.
And that's what I get excited about. It's not the liquidity event. It's the fact that you actually are building something.
You're part of
with
something.
value. It's the creating.
Yes.
Like you're creating.
Right.
You're creating something that is that's the hit.
And you're talking a lot about the people piece of that, creating a team.
100%.
But everything you just touched on had very little to do with product. It was about the people and the different
It's
capacities.
so much about that. I mean, and of course, product is a gateway into that. And I think at a certain point, unless you're running a services business, you have to get excited about the product as well. And you have to have a fantastic product, usually, not always, but usually. There's always exceptions to all of this stuff.
Right.
But the market ends up being a pretty good arbiter of what is good or not. Sometimes it's timing and whatnot. Yeah, but for sure, I mean, I think one of the best rushes that I have is, I'm not very good on the team piece. Like, I think I'm sure I would be a terrible teacher, like an elementary school teacher, because I don't think I'm very good at like trying to help people get from like 0 to 80%. I just am too impatient for that. And, I have to just learn, and I'm still learning how to kind of throttle down when people are on that 0 to 80%. I really like, though, seeing people get from like 80 to 100%, or if they thought their 80% was 100%, seeing and showing or letting them find out what their 100% is.
Right.
And that's part of the startup ecosystem. And so I think that's the fun, is to be able to see people put points on the board and win in ways that they did not even know were possible.
Realizing they can be greater than they are.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's hard because you have to push people to do that.
Sure.
And sometimes you have to push people. Sometimes you just have to show them the way. And sometimes
Right.
you have to lead by example and say,
Right.
well, I'm going to go do this and show you that it can be done so that you can end up having belief. But that's, I think, one of the great gifts that we have in being in the startup ecosystem, is that we're creating, and that doesn't necessarily have to have thousands of people or hundreds of people or tons of people. I mean, this is happening in this room right here when people are
Right.
doing something with 2 people, and they're creating and they're ideating what's possible beyond what was the context the day before, the week before, the month before.
What do you think, I mean, going back, you talk about 24 doing what, and in Columbus, Ohio, and not having that certain feel there back then, and what you got in New York and what you may have gotten in Silicon Valley. But when you think about today, and you think about places like Denver and places like Austin, Texas, and places like Boston, and where we're seeing Seattle, we're seeing things booming that are coming out of the ground like this. I mean, what do you think changed that allowed this sort of startup ecosystem to take off?
Well, I think the distribution of knowledge. I mean, and in fact, not to tie this into a product piece, but the distribution, the decentralization of knowledge and capital is really what I think unlocked this, right? So what Silicon Valley was so great at, 30, 40 years, 20, 30 years ago, right, in terms of just incubating. And this is where, demand aggregation is a really important component to incubating new ideas and new concepts and talent, and so like it's no coincidence up in Boulder, there's a burgeoning emerging foods and beverage industry, right? And talent begets more investors, and it just, the cycle continues. I think what has just simply happened is the radical decentralization of knowledge and capital and the access to that.
Sure.
That has, provides us this totally new opportunity that just did not exist 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's very cool.
It's exciting. And I mean, even it's funny, you mentioned Columbus, and Columbus is now, on one of those lists of cities where there's real opportunity today, where a couple of years ago there was very little.
That's what I've read. I haven't been back to Columbus, and
Sure.
I've probably been back once in 15 years. So, but from everything that I've read, and I've got a bunch of friends that are in the ecosystem, and it's kind of, Indianapolis, same thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you could look at various cities, not quite like Columbus.
Right.
There was some capital that got infused and brought from the Valley to Columbus,
Yep.
Ohio, as part of a fund, which you're probably well familiar with, that helped drive some of that. Ohio State is a big help to that as well,
Yeah.
because you've got this catalyst of 100,000 students. But that being said, I'm kind of amazed that when I travel across the country in almost every market, I'm seeing people create and start stuff, and it's very inspiring.
Absolutely. So let's jump to what you've got going now.
Yes.
What is this company? Who is this company?
FloWater, yeah. Well, first of all, I'm really excited about it, and thanks for, again, having me here and having the privilege to be able to talk about business in general and part of my path, but also the company itself. So FloWater exists to put an end to single-use plastic water bottles, period. And the way that we're doing that, and it really isn't just single-use plastic water bottles, but it also becomes single-use packaging.
Right.
And so what we're
Excuse
doing
me.
to achieve that is to unpackage your water. And what that means specifically is we're trying to own the last 6 feet of water line wherever consumers work, rest, and play. So let me just narrate a little bit of the story of water and how we got to where we are
Sure.
today. Because I think it's, I'm biased, I think it's pretty fascinating. At least 12 people here think it's fascinating. I don't know about the rest of you guys. But we don't have a problem in the US called, if only I could find a faucet to get something to drink, I wouldn't have to reach for a bottle of water. Like, that's not the problem that we have. And so if you look at the history of humanity, first of all, there was no packaged products up until the last few decades.
Right.
Second, we created civilization based upon access to water, right? That's where
Absolutely.
civilization would form first, around where you actually had resources and access to water. So then, kind of fast forward thousands or tens of thousands of years, everyone's drinking water, like from the well or the spring or rivers. The environment's not being polluted upon. We're not polluting radically the environment with plastic waste. So you go into the 50s and 60s, and something happens in the 60s and 70s. And what happens in the 60s and 70s is a bougie, new, packaged water product comes to market, which is, Perrier, right? So that kind of began the formation of packaged
Interesting.
water. And it was cool, and it was bougie, and you ordered it at restaurants, and it had like little bubbles, and it just was a brand.
Excuse me.
It's no sweat. I have no judgment. Actually, I look at you as a potential customer. This is great. We're just going to convert you. If you were
I opened the
if you were
workability.
drinking FloWater, I couldn't get a new customer.
I
out of
opened
it.
workability's refrigerator. That's what was in there.
No, it's great. We can. I actually, people sometimes feel guilty drinking bottled water in front of me, and they really shouldn't, because I think this is really about inspiration towards a better way of doing it, and also educating people. And this is kind of going back to my point about what has happened in the environment, but educating people about what's happened in the environment that's led us to this series of calamities that we now face over the coming decades. And you're going to be pretty amazed at the data, I believe, which is, so Perrier, and then then you got into Aquafina and Dasani, and those brands launched in the 80s. And Coke looks at this and they're like, well, we're marketing geniuses, and they are.
Right.
Like, how do we create a need where none exists and market so well that we can actually package up tap water, sell it at 1,000 times markup, ship it all over the world, and then deploy that recyclable bottle, not in a recycling container, and put it ultimately ending up in the oceans, lakes, rivers, and landfills. I mean, they don't directly put it in there, but that's
Right.
what happens with 75% of single-use plastics. And so what happened over time is it just became a big business. I mean, it was commercialism, right? Which is someone said, hey, we can make a shitload of money doing this.
Sure.
Like, let's wrap something around a cool package, tell a cool story. We'll launch this in Aspen, Colorado. It'll be from Fiji. How cool is it that we're shipping water from Fiji, taking water from the locals, selling it to you for $4? People bought into that idea. And now it's like you walk around and you kind of, like, I don't want to be so bold. I'm not going to say it quite this crassly, but now it's like walking around with a cigarette, which is not so cool. You know,
Right,
in the
yeah.
60s, 70s. In fact, if this was 1960, I'd be smoking a cigarette with you right now. And it's
There
not,
was a great photo that I saw right after the Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and it showed, it was 50, I think it was 50 years earlier. I have to say this because I'm a Bronco fan. It was 50 years earlier, it's the last time they won a Super Bowl, but it was the quarterback of the Chiefs. There was a picture of him 50 years earlier sitting on the sideline smoking a cigarette.
are you serious?
Sitting on the sideline.
That's a great, I should find a
in his uniform.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And it was funny. I had to go back and I researched that a little bit, and that was
It's
like,
unthinkable today,
but
right?
back then it was like such a cool thing.
Right.
The guy won the Super Bowl and he lit up a cigarette.
That's bottled water.
Yeah.
That's what's happening to bottled water, seriously. And so, like, kind of tying along, so all these brands come out, you know, and now bottled water is a $100 billion a year industry globally, $18 billion in the United States. And what happens, this is what is dangerous, right? So if plastic wasn't bad for you, if it wasn't bad for the environment, you know, we would have a different cause, right? And same with packaging. But we're shipping water all over the world, which is insanity. The CO2 byproduct, and the amount of waste and the oil consumption, et cetera, completely unnecessary. But second, plastic doesn't biodegrade, it photodegrades. One piece turns into 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 32, 64, et cetera. And so that ends up in microplastics. So there's a recent study out of SUNY that demonstrated that over 90% of the samples of tap and bottled water contain, on average, over 300 microparticulates of plastic per liter of water. What that translates into is you are drinking 2 credit cards worth of plastic every month, largely through water. And in those plastics, so there are 6,000 chemical compounds that are used to create cigarettes. We all know how bad cigarettes are. I'm not completely trying to equate cigarettes to bottled water.
Sure.
However, there's a lot of parallels. There are 10,000 known chemicals that are used to make the plastics in single-use plastic water bottles, endocrine disrupting chemicals. It's like having an IV drip of toxic chemicals that, it's just like cigarettes in the sense that one's not going to hurt you. In fact, one might even be good for you once in a while. I don't know, depending on the circumstance. But 10,000 is not good for you. 100,000 for you is really unhealthy.
Right.
And the same thing goes for bottled water. So literally now we are drinking our bottled water. And there's some parts of the Pacific Ocean that have more plastic particulate than there are fish in aquatic life by a factor of 6 to 1. And so this is an issue that if we do not stop it now, it is going to have cataclysmic effects on our environment and our ecosystem and our physical health, and ultimately the course of biology and human biology and offspring over the coming decades and coming generations. So we need to clean up what we're drinking. And the problem is intersected with people don't like or trust tap water. 60 to 80% of Americans don't like or trust tap water. And so that's kind of the setup to what we're solving for, which is we want to bring people back to the tap. I used to say it prior to 2016, make tap water taste great again. I do not say that any longer. Because that expression got just completely destroyed. So
Did you put it on a hat?
Yeah, no hats, no. We just don't talk about it. I only use it in jest until to get a little bit of a laugh out of it.
So before we get there, I'm curious. Thinking back, growing up here, we would drink tap water, and that's just
Right.
that was my understanding. And then when I was 15, we moved to, so this was mid-'80s, we moved to California, and I'll never forget the first time I went to a grocery store there, I saw the people with the big jugs
Yep.
filling up water, and it was so weird to me. So when you think of it today, is it that there's certain markets where it is safe to drink water? I mean, I drink water out of my tap every day. Is it safe in certain places, or is it just better to? I mean, do you have to have a greater understanding of where you live exactly within that specific city?
I think, so if you look at the data, roughly 60-80% of Americans don't like or don't trust their tap water. And if you look at actually what's in tap water, so municipalities generally do a pretty good job of getting water from reclamation through a process and delivering it to us in a sanitary way. And the way they sanitize it is through chlorine, generally, unless you're
Right.
running off a well or what have you.
Sure.
Chlorine is not, you do not want to be drinking chlorine even in low doses. I mean, this
Right.
is one of those things that it tastes bad. Also, there's a fair amount of data. And if you look at your stomach, I mean, the biome of the stomach, in fact, there's a lot of data out there that now shows that you have more SSRI receptors in your stomach than you actually do in your brain, right? And this is why they call it like your second brain. In some cases, it's almost like your first brain as it relates to some of the neuromechanical effects.
Right.
And chlorine destroys bacteria. It destroys the intestinal flora that's related to that. And so there's some things that are just inherently need to be put in tap water that you really don't want in your tap water, but it needs to be put in there to run it through all this distributed pipe. And in
Right.
some cases, this pipe is 30, 50, 100 years old, which is picking up heavy metals and deposits along the way.
Sure.
And it's just the impact of an age-old infrastructure. So that's one dynamic that is systemic everywhere across the United States and to a larger degree globally. The second thing, though, is that we're starting to pollute. We've been polluting since 1974. We've been pouring glyphosate on our crops so that we could get higher yields, and that is destructive to human health over the long run. So if you look at the data and look at the increased incidence of renal cancer or celiac disease or a number of other diseases, it almost directly overlays the increased usage of glyphosate. And I believe that's a result of glyphosate running into food stores as well as running into our water. And that is an effect where you're not going to drink a little bit of Roundup and then like suddenly grow a third head the second day. But over the course of time, these are going to have deleterious effects, just like tobacco does, just like cigarettes.
Right.
So there's the second thing that's happening is we are driving these outside influences by effectively destroying our waterways by putting all this crap back into the system, including single-use plastic water bottles, which are photodegrading, turning into our
Right.
water, and we're literally drinking it.
So there's a cycle that's just.
So it's this vicious cycle. Now it's catching up. It's now we have to do something abrupt to stop it because it
Right.
has momentum. And the third thing is there's certain areas of the United States that don't have safe tap water. You know, PFAS. I haven't even started talking about PFAS. I won't because there's not enough time. But this is it's like the 3M product that is Teflon. It kind of coats off. That's being used in a lot of chemical and manufacturing processes
Right.
that ends up in the waterways. I mean, I could talk for an hour about some of the things that are increasingly quickly making their way into the waterway.
Right.
And that's beyond simply things like dissolved solids. So some people just don't like the taste of the tap water because it really has a very high total dissolved solid content. The takeaway on it ends up being consumers don't like it. Sometimes they don't know why they don't like it. And I
Right.
think this is what's about to unfold over the next 5 years is there's going to be this reckoning now. So that now that people are moving away from plastics. I was talking to an executive in a hotel that runs sustainability in a hotel chain in New York. And she told me 2 weeks ago, there are people literally refusing to enter the room until they remove all the single-use plastics out of that room.
Really?
Now, I think that's pretty amazing. I mean, that's all happened in the last couple of years. But what does that consumer do? Because they're not going to go drink out of tap. That's part of this conundrum that
Right.
we're trying to solve for is taking back the tap and transforming it in a way that gets people to love what they're drinking wherever they work, rest, and play without having to ship stuff everywhere. And that's FloWater.
Okay, no, I like it. Before we get into how that actually works, I mean, I see the reason why you would do this, and I think it's very honorable to do something that's going to make a difference. Did you set out to do that?
Well, I have two daughters. They're 16 and 18. And
Excuse me.
no, it's fine. You're doing great considering that you're not feeling great. So thank you for being a champ on
Sure.
this. And I'll tell you one of the driving points for me was I went through kind of a variety of highs and lows with my physical fitness. So I was pretty fit in college, played sports, and so like you graduate and I was, 6'3", 230 pounds, good shape, that turned into like 250 pounds of not so good shape, that turned into like 270 pounds of really not good shape after like dining and entertaining and not working out. And then one day you wake up and you're watching The Bachelor, which has been on for like 15 years, which I do remember what everyone in my company is going to find it hilarious because I don't watch any TV at all and I don't know anything about, people are talking about TV shows that I didn't even know existed that are apparently part of pop culture today. What was the one that Mike? Curb Your Enthusiasm apparently is a big show. So I'm in the hunt right now with FloWater, right? So I'm all in on it. And suddenly you wake up one day and you're like fatter than the fat guy on The Bachelor that everyone was talking about. And I look at myself, I'm like, man, this is like, I gotta like do something about this. So I had this major transformation where, I got down to like 190 pounds and started running a lot and working out. And it just was, something that I had to take care of. But what I realized was, there's this expression that, well, I'll forget the expression. It's 70% diet is what it comes down to, right? Exercise is really important, but you can't outwork a bad diet.
Right.
And that was, I was still working out, but I was eating like crap. And part of what I was doing was drinking a couple, 3 cans of soda every day. And that's, 400 calories, 300 calories a day. And so I had, I got off that. I mean, I drink 1 soda, 1 Dr. Pepper on Thanksgiving every year for the last 5 years, but that's it. Like, I'm off soda entirely. But I would see.
Has anyone ever tried to sneak like a Mr. Pibb in instead?
I would know. I would know. Like my taste buds are so. I mean, I wait all year for that. So like in moderation, and my moderation is that one time a year. It's not every day, every week. But here's like the tie back to my kids. They were like 10 and 12 at the time. And I'd take them to these soccer games and I'd see everybody showing up and like I'm bringing things like, apples and protein shakes because like I'm on this health kick and I've like got this like egg dish that I'm cooking that I used to do after workouts. And like none of the kids loved me for that at all. It's like article review night, but for food for my kids. But all these parents are bringing like soda and candy bars and like just all this shit. And I remember just getting so frustrated because I do feel like carbonated, sugary beverages are the equivalent of, it's like liquid heroin for our kids. And in the neural pathways that are tied to sugar and the addictive properties of that are not that much different than what they are for illicit substances that are illegal drugs. But the big beverage companies are allowed to start at a much younger age, right? At least marketing the illegal stuff is illegal. At least tobacco products, you have to market to them when they're over the age of 18 and say alcoholic products over the age of 21. What we're doing is we're letting society is allowing big beverage companies to market to our kids and get them programmed on a series of addictive tendencies and behaviors. And that really, as you can tell, that really fired me up.
Yeah.
And so I looked at this as really kind of 3 things intersecting. One is, it's an opportunity to do something that's really meaningful from the perspective of sustainability and stopping something bad from happening and replacing with something good. The second is this wellness orientation around if we can get kids to get off soda and energy drinks and all this crap that they're and I don't judge kids. Look, my kid asked me to go to McDonald's the other day. I took her, and like she bought a Coke. So I'm not so extreme where I cannot let my kids have kind of an induction of
Sure.
of being a child, but having it programmed into you and become a habit and a pattern.
Right.
And so water is an opportunity for us to use as a platform to educate people, and 80% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. The third thing, by the way, was this is just a cool opportunity. Like no one had done
Sure.
it before. It's like new frontier, and I get excited about challenges like that.
That's amazing. So where is the company today?
So roughly 65 employees, around 30 in Denver. We've got an amazing, amazing team. I mean, our success, ultimately, and I think this is one of the things that I would just remind all of us as startup founders is that, everyone always says like, hey, like what was the idea about this? Or what was the idea about that? Like, it's all execution, man. I mean, so many freaking ideas have died in the valley. Like the valley is full of archives of great ideas that no one could execute shit on. And I love execution. I love great ideas too, don't get me wrong, it's super exciting.
Sure.
But the reality is you have to go and execute. And to execute, you have to have a great team. And so 60 employees, 30 here. We did 10 million in rev last year, 30 million in bookings. We've got about 5,000 FloWater Refill Stations throughout nearly 50 states across the United States. Used by big brands, Google, Airbnb, Hyatt, Electronic Arts Discovery, Warner Brothers. And so we're really trying to expand this platform in the process of expanding and looking at more capital, growth capital, so that we can accelerate our pace.
That's amazing.
And we have this window right now of opportunity to put like literally gas on the fire where we have the market momentum behind us and we've got a lot of product and company momentum, but I'm trying to amplify that with speed over the next 24 months.
What about here in the Denver area? Are there companies or there buildings that have a FloWater station, if you will?
You know, there are, and I couldn't tell you exactly which by name,
Sure.
though I imagine somebody on my team could tell you. But we just recently opened up Denver, and so I moved the company here around 4 years ago.
Okay.
This is like really the engine for, you know, marketing, operations,
Sure.
finance, people, product development. All of the sales stuff is for the most part out in the market. We started in a market-to-market basis. So we
Yeah.
had reps, techs, trucks in San Francisco,
Right.
converging in a market, calling on hotels, schools, corporations, really infiltrating that. And we go to LA, and then we go to Phoenix, and we're making our way kind of west to east. We're
Sure.
opening up about 6 markets across the United States. We just opened up Denver. You know, I expect that we'll see a lot of FloWater refill stations in the market over the next couple of years here in the Denver area.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes without saying. I can't imagine there wouldn't be some level of interest, anyone sitting in the room, anyone watching this video, anyone hearing this story. So let me ask you, I mean, if someone works for a company here in Denver or is involved in a hotel chain or what have you,
Right.
you know, what would be the way for them to be an advocate of your company?
Well, I mean, I don't want to make it sound so promotional and at all commercial, because the reality is
Sure.
anybody here that ends up getting a FloWater refill station is not going to change our month or quarter or year. It will change our cause, though. That I do want to say, because
Right.
it's through the advocacy of people saying, hey, we're going to offer something to our employees that's better, or our guests
Sure.
that's better, or our, you know, members that's better, and that's plastic or packaging free. You know, www.drinkflowwater is where you could go and fill out a request for more information. We're happy to do free trials. So our entire business model is founded on a free trial basis, which is we let somebody try the product, they get to try it for 2 weeks. If they love it, they get to keep it for $4 a day. I mean, this is what I get excited about. This is why it's easy to sell FloWater, so to speak, and I'm not trying to sell right now, but
Sure.
it's kind of hard to decouple.
Yeah, of course.
For $4 a day, what we can do is demonstrate an 80% reduction in single-use plastic water bottles in whatever environment you're in. A 50% reduction in soda and coffee consumption every day, because what consumers are doing is they're drinking more water and they're drinking less of the bad stuff. And we'll see a 2 to 5-fold increase in daily hydration in a market where 80% of Americans are chronically dehydrated. So for $4 a day, do I think it's a pretty good value and it's
Sure.
an insane ROI? I do. And what we'll do is we'll let people try it for free for a couple weeks, and if they love it, they get to keep it. If they don't love it, we'll be happy to pick it up.
Gotcha.
And we'll redeploy that elsewhere.
And then last question, and I'll open it up to the audience. What would you say to people here, you know, aside from, hey, let's try your product, but what can we do as it pertains to the conversation we're having? I mean, the plastic thing is obviously a massive issue, and so there's obvious answers, right? Don't use plastic bags at the grocery store, bring your own bags, things of that nature. The straw discussion, but are there things we're not thinking about that we can do to help the situation that we're dealing with today?
Well,
You know, I'm sure you've done a lot of studying on this and research.
yeah, I mean, so I have a general, this is a life philosophy, this is a business philosophy, and
Sure.
this is a sustainability philosophy as well, which is, I think, you know, every Inc. article wants like the 5 things, like what are the magic, right? And we all want like the magic bullet of like what's the 2 or 3 or 5 things. And certainly there's some interesting things that haven't been thought of before.
Right.
One aspect is, for example, I think what we should be doing is applying the same type of tax as we apply to cigarettes, which on average federally is 46% to bottled water. And I think we should take that bottled water tax, which will generate $6 to $8 billion a year in accretive revenue, and put that into municipal water regeneration and upgrading the plants. Like, that seems like a really good idea to me, which is let's fix infrastructure and make meaningful improvements to that,
Sure.
so that over the long term, everyone has access to clean drinking water that they can trust. That being said, that's a multi-decade plan.
Right.
And so kind of going back to my life and business and personal philosophy as well as sustainability is, it really rarely ends up being 1 thing or 2 things or 3 things. Reality is it ends up being 10,000 things done more often well than not, right? And so I look at this and it's like, it's like eating, which is I can go have a binge meal and a cheat meal and just like load up and go to In-N-Out and like stuff myself. And that's okay. I mean, I don't know, like behaviorally, that's such a great like habit to get into. But if I do that once a month, but I'm doing well in the other 29 days of the month, like all is good.
Right.
If I'm doing that 29 days out of the month, I'm in trouble. And the issue is applied across sustainability. It's the same thing, which is I think that our evangelizing and our demanding of either workplace or where we stay in hotels or where we work out, demanding solutions that are better for the environment but also better for us. And that's not a FloWater commercial, because there's a lot of other products out there that are in the market that fit that genre. But one is kind of demanding or asking that, or putting your dollars for where you believe. And so
Right.
I'll give you an example. On a personal level, I'm not going to say the name of the company, but there's a certain ride-sharing app that I've never used before in my life, and we won't reimburse for. I probably will change that philosophy a little bit, because some of the dynamics of that organization have changed, because I think it's a terrible company. I think it represents the worst of Silicon Valley. So is it going to matter to that one company? No, but if enough people start to make
Sure.
decisions like that, it does have an impact. And so when you're at a hotel and you don't go to that hotel room because you don't want to enter because there's single-use plastics in there, and you're like, that's like a cigarette to me, that actually has a meaningful impact on the decision-making collectively for all of us. But at the end of the day, I look at it and say it's aspirational, which is we could do something amazing for the environment, and it doesn't have to be like net negative, right? This can be net positive for all of us.
Right.
And it just requires a little bit of a shift. And to some degree, it requires a little bit of awareness. I mean, you're probably not going to forget the fact that I told you you're drinking 2 credit cards worth of plastic every month in your water. And that's what's lining your stomach right now. And if you actually ended up doing something different, you would actually bypass all of that. And just getting the education out there to people
Sure.
is what causes people to shift behavior.
All right, great stuff. Well, let's open it up to the audience for questions. Just put your hand up if you have one, sir.
Yeah, question for you. So when you started out, how long did it take you to find your solution?
On the FloWater side?
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. I think I'd answer that by saying we're still finding solutions, as the market grows. And I'm going to answer that question by saying, hey, we're still on that journey. We have a 5-year product development plan. We've got about 4 or 5 different products that are in process right now. Actually, this is a multi-use vessel that is intended to be reused over and over and over again for the same price as single-use packaged water. We're launching that. So that's kind of an example of another product that we've launched. I will tell you that the very first product that we launched with was a FloWater Refill Station that was intended to take consumer retail transactions with a credit card in universities. And after many, many months, and ultimately probably a couple years of pushing at that, we still have 3 of those in the market. They're almost more legacy units that are museum pieces. And so it didn't work very well. And we quickly pivoted within 3 to 6 months of launching and worked under the model that we have. So, there's 2 answers to that. There's really 3. One is it's been an iterative process. 2 is it took us a while to dial in the product in terms of kind of getting it to launch, beta testing. When I produced our very first manufacturing run, I did 4. I remember people saying like, hey, why don't you run 300 of these? The reason we didn't run 300 is because the other 296 would have had like problems that we identified on the 4, but we didn't realize till we put it in the market that like, oh, this thing leaks, and it's a good thing we don't have 300 in the market where we have to fix that. So it took us about 12 months to really dial in and hone in the product. And then I would say it took us about 12 to 18 months to really dial in and figure out where's the there in the market, which is where we've narrowed it down into 5 key verticals for us. So for example, there's 10 million SMBs in the United States, 10 million small and medium-sized businesses. We don't call on one of them. It's a huge market. I mean, it's very attractive. Like it's the longest tail. Tons of compressed revenue in there. But it's a total distraction for us right now as it relates to strategy and adoption and building a brand. So, it took us some time to figure that out. And part of that was like strategy, and then part of it is, hey, you go out in the market and then you actually test your strategy and you see like, were you right? Or where were you right? Where were you wrong?
Who else, sir?
So you mentioned multiple times that hotels, there's this tendency of tenants and customers refusing to go into the rooms. Are they one of your biggest customers? How did you land in that journey and those stories?
Yeah, and I want to clarify, that was just I know one story. I'm sure it's happened more than once, but I just happened to hear that story for the first time from a big premium hotel brand and the person that runs sustainability. But what we are seeing is a massive shift of consumers where they do not, like hotels right now it used to be really cool to have, I don't want to say brand names of hotels, but pick your favorite brand name hotel, bottle of water on the side, and it was co-branded. they're all like racing to rip that stuff off now, right? Because they do not want to be on an environmental cigarette. So that migration is happening. That's directly a result of consumer adoption or dissonance around the product. At the end of the day, businesses care what their constituents care about, right? Like, as much as we like to say that we do things for, idealistic reasons, and some people do, but the majority of people don't. And so hotels are probably 35% of our business today. It's rapidly growing. And, we're starting to see a ton of innovation within hotels now that's going to roll out over the next 12, 24 months, which I think is fantastic because you got a transient population that's seeing a lot of stuff, and they're going to go and take that back to where they live and implement that in their environment. So, I'm really bullish on what's happening in the hospitality front.
Someone on this other row?
Yeah, so I guess a question on selling a sustainable product. Do you go in and sell really the mission and tell them, hey, your customers don't want this at all, this is like a new cigarette, you go with that hard, or do you focus on the other benefits?
I think that's such a terrific question, and it depends on your audience, right? If it's businesses versus consumers, like customers versus consumers, customers are one and the same sometimes, but for us it's B2B and it's moving to consumer. I think the reality is that the way that businesses make decisions is based on ROI and outcomes, right? And understanding what their consumers want, but also looking at what the impact can be. And so, at Startup Grind 2 weeks ago in San Francisco, I was on a sustainability panel about how to actually commercialize a sustainable product. And one of the truisms that I believe is a truism is that that product has to stand on its own as a great product that consumers love. And they have to love it about as much as their favorite brand. Ideally, you get them to love it more. And so I'm a believer in wanting to build a brand of a consumer product that consumers can feel good about, but that has product attributes that exceed that and lead with those merits. And this is where, I don't love using Elon Musk analogies. I mean, not because I don't admire him, but I'm also not a fanboy either. I mean, I just think he's built a pretty impressive business, and he's clearly very entrepreneurial, and he's tenacious and smart. But it's the difference between Prius and Tesla, right? Having owned a Prius before, I mean, didn't drive very early one, didn't drive well, wasn't comfortable, back always hurt, but didn't look cool. But never broke down. It got amazing gas mileage, right? Whereas Tesla's the opposite, badass, super fast. It's got all these features. It's safe, it autopilots. And by the way, you can feel good about it because it's a sustainability halo tied to it. I think that's really, if I were to use kind of parallels there, I think that's a really powerful way to market. But also, that being said, there's a rising tide right now. I mean, if you had a sustainable soap and it made it to its way on the shelf in Whole Foods, hard to get there because a lot of sustainable soaps, or even Safeway or whatever it is. The reality is rising tide raises all ships, so you probably do pretty well right now, but I think building out a differentiated brand is really critical as well.
All right, one more.
You mentioned your team a few times. What's your kind of philosophy in terms of building your team, and then how do you make sure that your philosophy stays within the team as it grows?
Well, so two things. One is, actually three. One is there's a book by a guy named Jeffrey Smart. I would highly recommend it. It's called Who, The Definitive Guide to Hiring, or something like that.
The A method.
What is it?
The A method.
The A method to hiring?
Who?
The A method to hiring. Jeffrey Smart. He actually is a Denver resident, I believe. I've never met him. We've adopted about 80% of that book. Pretty close to 100% of it. I only agree with 60, 70, 80% of it, but I'm a big fan of, if you believe, a really good idea that's been proven out, applied well, better than kind of just tweaking everything on your own. And so that's one thing that we've done, and there's a really regimented process. I would highly, highly recommend using that book, studying it, listening to Audible, really helpful. Second, I look for two things kind of beyond that process, chemistry and competency. So I want that talent to be in the top 20th percentile for that role, but then I also think about chemistry a lot. And I don't think people talk about chemistry enough in the organization, which is, the way I kind of define it is, when I see when I see my chief operating officer, Chris Liccardi, calling, do I want to answer the phone? If I want to answer the phone, that's chemistry. I can't always answer the phone, but I always want to answer Chris's calls when he calls me, because we have a good working chemistry. I know we have a great cadence. Doesn't mean every call is fun. Chris can certainly attest to that as much as probably I can. But I do really enjoy and admire working with him, and that really is part of the glue, which I think doesn't get discussed a lot, which is, do you have a good working chemistry? Can you get the using shorthand? And I look at that a lot. I think the third thing ultimately ends up being how to like extend it beyond. It's really hard. We're working on that now. So one of the, I struggle with it because I look at, like, it's a lot easier when there's 5 people sitting in a room and then all of a sudden you go to 60 people, or like even over a period of years, and you're like, wait, what happened? Like, is this translating? And so one of the things that we do is we do a quarterly FloWater Way. We bring everybody from the organization throughout the United States, whoever it is that just joined in the last 90 days, bring them to the company and kind of indoctrinate them into, it's not policy, I hate policies. It's not admin, it's not here's how to do email, here's what Gmail is, here's your CRM, all that stuff. This is the fabric of the company. Like, this is how we operate. This is what the value means. Like, when we talk about a value or a vision statement or what have you, it's like, well, what's the real meaning of that? And trying to instill that. And then I think it's a lot of time and dialogue. I don't think there's any other way of doing it. The last piece I would add on that, by the way, though, is I think I have to lead by example. Period. I mean, I mess that up. Don't get me wrong. I definitely mess that up. But like, if I want them to work hard, I have to be constantly the hardest working guy in that office. Every week, that's got to be me. And I've got to be at my best, and I've got to be accountable. I've got to own up to stuff I mess up and say, like, I effed that up. If I want them to have that level of transparency with me as well. And that's hard stuff to do, but those are the things that I think about and work on.
Fantastic. Listen, let's give it up for Raz.
Thank you, guys.